How's it, YouTube? What we're gonna talk about right now is some first aid. The problem with first aid is the fact that it literally means almost everything. What we're gonna do is give some operational definitions. That way, define our terms a little bit so we can kind of chunk this up into some digestible bite-sized pieces. The first thing we have to do with first aid operationally is let's separate it from trauma. All my trauma stuff is my trauma stuff, and my first aid stuff is my first aid stuff. Technically, trauma falls under this umbrella of first aid. Talking about course of action development, best case, worst case, most likely, least likely. Trauma is my worst case, but it is least likely. When I'm doing worst case stuff, I don't want to be reaching past this stuff to go for my stuff that I need immediately. So first aid, I tend to separate in my kits into the type of situations in which I've got a little bit of time to be able to take care of people in a slow and controlled manner. Trauma is not always like that. So that's the first thing we want to do with first aid. Then for first aid, we want to start separating things with, are we dealing with an illness or are we dealing with an injury? The analogy that I try to give that hopefully makes a little bit of sense is if you think about a car, right? Well, there's things that can go wrong with the car. It can be misused, parts wear out, things break down. That's more of our illness side, and our injury side, worst case being trauma, being like a car accident. But there can also be other things, fender benders or dents in your doors or cracks in your windshield, your cuts, your scrapes, abrasions. That's the kind of small, most likely injuries that you're most likely going to sustain. That's the other big distinction, because even when I start differentiating between my first aid equipment, I want to worry about what is illness related stuff. Maybe I've got some basic medications, over the counter type things that I've got separated in one compartment. And then I've got injury type things, my gauze, my band-aids, maybe my super glue, Dermabond, these types of things to be able to do some wound care, my burn dressings, and that kind of stuff that I have completely separate. That way, even when I have more time to deal with it, but it still is nicely organized, and I don't have to worry about reaching past a whole ton of things. Biggest thing with your first aid kits is try to resist the urge to overpack them. Making sure there's good organization inside there will really go a long way, whether it be a major thing or a minor thing. You won't have to pull out 10 items to get to the one item that you need, because you'd be surprised with even some minor injuries. Sometimes it can get a little chaotic, and good organization is the key to success. The other thing with first aid that we want to start thinking about is balancing priorities. I often ask, what's the most important part of a medical situation? Getting away from danger, rendering aid, or calling for help? I love to ask this question, and I make people ultimately defend positions that are not the first instinctive one that they might go to, because the answer is yes, they all matter. The question is do you value each one, or do you understand the importance of each one, that when you find yourself in specific situations, you'll find these small little moments and gaps in time that you'll be able to do productive things to try to accomplish all of them. And are you plugged into whatever your situation is enough to read your environment? That way you can balance your priorities. Often they're going to be dictated to you. And so if you understand how your priorities are being dictated to you, that's fine. You find what productive thing you can do in that moment, and hopefully accomplish all three of these very important tasks of getting away from danger, rendering care or aid, and calling for help. The absolute last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to first aid, that really should be the most important part, or the thing that we lead with, is what's the best kind of medicine? The best kind of medicine is preventative medicine. Yeah, we have all this cool stuff to deal with people when they get hurt or injured or sick, but the question is, did they have to get hurt or injured or sick in the first place? I do things inside of my hiking packs where I don't want to become a heat casualty, so I do things like drink plenty of water, and I make sure I bring enough of that. I have some electrolyte salts, I have sunscreen. If I'm working with heavy machinery or things that are sharp, I can put gloves on. These types of risk mitigation measures should be part of your first aid discussion conversation inside of your head. First aid should start with what can be prevented and avoided in the first place. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that way you hopefully don't have to deal with any of these circumstances in the first place. Then you're just ready to take care of all the other people that don't have the same risk mitigation tools that you do. Hopefully this is a helpful introductory conversation about first aid, how you should begin conceptualizing it and begin preparing for it. If you're interested in learning more, head on over to our Fieldcraft Survival app, where we talk about every single one of these topics in detail. We'll see you over there. Take care.